All right, Horsethief Falls. Let's start this as we always do with a Google Earth map of the hike. To give you an idea of where this is, I'm going to zoom way out until we can see Denver. So if you're familiar with Colorado, here's Denver, kind of central east. This is the hike. Pretty far south, much closer to Colorado Springs than it is to Denver, up in the mountains. This is actually, this road that it's on is the trail out to Vindicator Valley, if you've seen that hike log of mine. So this is the trailhead. I'm going to use Street View here so you can see exactly how small it is and how limited the parking is. This is a trailhead you want to get to on an off day, early in the morning, or plan to walk from somewhere else. And frankly, this is not a road that I'd want to walk on from one of the other pull-offs, which is down the road a ways. There is parking on this side of the road here in the opposite direction. You just have to dart across it, and then there's a small parking lot. So the trailhead's main landmark is that mine, or tunnel entrance rather, which we'll see at the end of the video in greater detail. The trail itself starts with a switchback, and I'll turn the elevation profile on here in a second so you can see how much gain there is. Not a lot, but it does go up a little bit quickly. Then it follows this trail here along this not quite ridge, but it's very well shaded basically the entire way. If you're looking for a trail that doesn't have exposure, then this is a pretty good one. And you can get the you can, even on a warm day, this trail doesn't feel too bad. So this is a 1.4 mile out and back each way, so call it 2.5 miles round trip to get out to Horsethief Falls. Horsethief Falls, the day we went, which was sometime in April, I think the second week of April, was just a horsetail falls with wispy water. Those are my favorite kind of waterfall to photograph because you get a sense of the water with a long exposure, but you also get to see the rocks and the details that it flows through. It's not just tons of soft water, hey, look at this. So why is this in here? Anyway, this is the landmark you're going to look for at the trail, that tunnel. We're going to start off here with some manual video mode shots of Steinbeck, the most handsome dog on YouTube. And this is a photo of him. This was taken with the Yashica 45mm 1.7 that I scavenged from a GSN on the A7S II. Here it is. This might be the Brighton star that I'm using in this clip. At any rate, we'll do some shaky cam because this video predates my gimbal. And we'll start off up the trail. And the trail, though it has some incline, is not too challenging. This is after the first switchback, the one switchback in the trail, I should say. And it goes through some aspen and conifer forest mixed trees here. And as you can see, if the sun's coming straight down, you'll get some exposure on the trail, but as long as it's off to an angle, there's thick trees on each side of the trail, and you're going to be pretty good for getting nice shade for the entire hike. You can tell also by the mosses here growing off to the side of the trail that it's pretty well shaded most of the year, most of the days, most of the year. Here's a photo taken with a Nikon F100 on Fuji 400H, pulled 2 stops to 100 ISO because I forgot to update the ISO settings when I loaded the film. Oops. These other 2 shots were taken with the Alpha 7S with some old Nikon lenses. That last one, I had a 28mm Nikon lens mounted in a tilt adapter for Sony E, one of these ones that gives you some tilt control. And we'll see a video with that where I just do a circle with it later on, not too far away, in about 3 minutes. This is what the trail looks like, and we stopped here because there were people passing behind us, and we were still working on training Steinbeck. Very cute dog, but also when we got him last November, very insecure. And so we've been building his confidence with challenges that he can do, like climbing rocks, which we'll see photos of in a little, well, at the end of this video, and doing hikes like this to help him realize that these are things that he can do, and also training him to sit and look at us when people pass. And in April, when we recorded this, we were still working on that training. Now here in July, as I'm recording this voiceover, he has really gotten a whole lot better and gotten very used to the idea that people pass us on trails and on walks, and that's a-okay. So you can see that there's a lot of flaring. This footage was taken with, this looks like the Yashica lens again. Could be the Nikkor 28mm. Actually, I think it's the Nikkor, based on the flaring. Anyway, so no, the Nikon doesn't. For those of you who are here for the hiking portion of it, I'm sorry about all this going back and forth about the lenses. That's for the photography audience. This was taken with one of the Lentar lenses, either the 18 or the 21, I forget which is why there's all that flaring when the sun gets just outside of the frame. At any rate, though most of the trail is shaded, there are a couple of clearings going up to Horsethief Falls. This is one of them, and off to the left here is a little bit of creek access, which, if there's no water flowing, and I imagine that during the summer there probably is little to no water, not likely a whole lot of reason to go out here, but during the spring, this is a very nice place for the dogs to splash around and cool off on their hike. And nice little open area. Right over there on the left side on that hill, that's a big aspen grove, which I have to imagine in the fall will be absolutely spectacular. Now here is a video with, looks like the Lentar 21mm, could be the 18 on the Nikon tilt shift adapter. And here I'm tilting it out, and now I'm going to rotate the adapter as smoothly as I can, so you can kind of see, for those of you who are here interested in the photography stuff, how a tilt shift adapter distorts perception and perspective and can affect images in use. The trail continues from that clearing here back into forest and shaded areas, and lots of flare, because Lentar lenses, though inexpensive and full of image character, lacked some technical refinements like flare protection. The trail itself, there are some parts of it that are tougher with some boulder fields, but the majority of it is like this, fairly well packed, and some roots in places and things like that, but generally not too hard to walk. I forget if this trail is rated easy or moderate. Personally, I'd rate it as a harder easy trail, simply because there are some of those boulder fields, and when trails are being rated, they're rated for the hardest portion of that trail, even if it's only like 30 feet long. But the majority of the trail, very easy to traverse. So if you have kids, and there were lots of families with young kids out on the trail that day, this would be a great hike for kids. Great picnic areas along the way, if you're willing to sit on the ground. And of course, you can always grab lunch at the falls on a day when the water's flowing and have a very nice setting for your lunch. We'll do some stills here at this break. I could not find a name for that peak in the background. It might not be named, it might just be designated with a number, but this is one of the openings, and a very, very nice place to pause and catch your breath. And this is another area that would be just spectacular in the fall, because you've got a mix of aspen trees over on those hills with conifers. So here's another shot from the F100 with the Fuji 400H at 100 ISO. I think all three of these stills are from that same roll of film. Yes, they are. And there you can see this is the Lentar 18mm. I think everything with the F100 was on the Lentar 18mm for that day. And then this is just a bit of video taken of the clouds going over that peak. I recalled them moving, but in my preview they don't seem to be. So let's, fingers crossed, that this is more interesting than just footage of clouds staying still. At any rate, back to the trail, and again, really nicely shaded. There are a lot of dead trees because of the pine beetle that's wreaking havoc here in Colorado, but by and large, none of them look like they were minutes away from falling over. If you saw my Rocky Mountain Alpine Lakes video last week, somewhere in that video there's footage of a tree falling over. I somehow missed it during my narration. Anyway, none of that in this video. Just trees and a generally easy trail. That second clearing is at a fork. There's one port. The fork goes up to the summit, or up to a summit loop, and then the other direction, the direction we followed, goes on along to Horsethief Falls, which was our destination. So easygoing, nice setting for a hike. There's a difference between what makes a good hike and what makes a good photo shoot. And when we're talking about landscapes and things like that, traditional landscape formula for successful landscape images is a nice deep depth of field, nearby foreground objects, distant background objects, with a good, interesting middle ground. Forests make that really, really hard. Even with a wide-angle lens like an 18mm or a 14mm, something like that, where you can capture all of a tree, it's really hard to get incredibly interesting video and stills in a forest simply because of how closely everything is together. If you're willing to sacrifice the entire tree, which you really kind of have to do, you can still get interesting images of creeks like this or of other scenery along the path. So there are definitely ways that you can still get interesting photos. This is a photo of the hardest part of the trail, by the way, that boulder field. It's out of place in the video. That was nearer the beginning. But once you get past that, the rest of the trail is generally not hard. So approaching the falls, which is what we're doing here, the creek gets right next to the trail. The trail was damp, it wasn't muddy, but it did get a little bit slippery in places getting close to the falls. Again, if you want to practice or just enjoy cascade photos, this is a really good place to do it. Cascade photos are like, that's a little cascade, are really good practice for waterfall photos because the techniques are basically the same and you can get your camera right down in front of them. And generally the water's not really rushing, so it's a whole lot safer, and they're usually right next to the trail. So they're easy to access as well. And they can still turn into really nice photos. So these are some samples in the forest where you can see that sacrificing the entire tree just to give a sense of the forest, but still having an interesting foreground, can give you images that are successful in a forest setting. So once we got to the falls, I decided to grab the camera and climb up to a little bit of rock scramble up to the higher portion of the falls to get some up-close photos of Horsethief Falls with the Rokinon 14mm on the A7S II, and also some footage with that. And another reason to like Horsethief Falls that have slower flows, less water volume, is that you can get up to them and be a little bit closer to them, and it's less of a risk. You still have to be careful if you're going to do this because waterfalls, that's fantastic footage. All right, this is how I'm going to win all the Webbies right here. I had to set the camera down to climb up that rock. At any rate, you can get right up next to many Horsethief Falls without the risk of the water volume sweeping you away. You don't want to get swept away in a creek in the mountains or in a river in the mountains under any circumstances. putting aside the loss of camera gear. A lot of these rivers and creeks go through bouldery areas like this one, and getting swept into an area like this during high water flow could be a really serious situation. But when water flow is low and the rocks aren't super slippery, it's really easy just to walk across them if you have good shoes or good boots, and be able to get up very close for photos where you can really make out the detail of the water moving over the rocks. And here are some of the photos I took while I was up there. I think all of these were all of these were with the Alpha 7S and the Rokinon 14mm. Now in some of these you can see the water drop spray looks like dots, and that's because that individual frame that captured the movement of that water drop is it's not, the A7S II does not have a universal shutter, so it's scanning the shutter quickly over and over and over again during the exposure. And so when something like that water drop moves very quickly across the frame, it gets captured each time the sensor is scanned, and that's why the water drops have that dot-like appearance. The reason a lot of them have that is because these are probably 20 to 40 frames for each image to simulate a long exposure and a blurry water image. Now, having taken the photos, it is time to walk back down the rocks, and you guys get to do it with me. So thumbs up to my wife that I'm coming back down. Not going down the creek though, because that's a little bit slippery and I don't want to fall. You can see I already got pretty wet just standing next to the falls right there. So this is how I came up. But when you're out climbing around on rocks, sometimes the way up is not the way down, as is the case here. Oh boy. You know, it looked good at first, and then it just got really steep, so let's not do that one. We're gonna walk back up this way, and we'll find a slightly gentler way down over here. Bit shaky. Cannot wait till I have my gimbal to use in a situation like this. And let's see, do I notice that water drop on the lens? Have I noticed it yet? I'm not sure if I've noticed it. But I'm going to make all of the photography crowd really happy when I notice that water drop and just reach up and clean it off like this with my dirty, dirty hiking shirt. Oh yeah, touch the lens with that shirt. That is a great idea. Okay, that's good enough. So this is how we're going to go down the rocks. And it's kind of hard to tell with the 14mm lens distortion. It's not as steep a grade as the previous one, but it's still fairly steep. So 3 points of contact, and the third point will be the tripod when I'm not sliding down the rocks like that and using my other hand. And it's always a good idea, if you're not doing something nuts like carrying a full-size tripod and a video camera, climbing down rocks, to do a 3 points of contact practice, especially if you're not doing ropes or don't want to fall. Going down is always harder than going up in situations like this, even though this is as close to a natural staircase as you're going to find. So next up, this is the end of the hike and the end of the video footage, so I'll share with you about another 5 minutes or so here, 2 minutes rather, of stills from the trip that I didn't make it in. We'll start off with a few photos of Steinbeck, also known as Adventure Dog. These were taken on the A7S II with the Lentar 21mm, trying to emphasize his placement in the forest. And ultra wide, this is the situation where ultra wides are fine for portraits. This is just a down tree that I thought was interesting near the entrance, and this is the trailhead from the switchback. We're going to take a look here at the tunnel This is the entrance to the closed off tunnel. This is an old, I suspect this was used either, if not for mining vehicles, then just as the road tunnel at some point. That's the door. Let's get closer to the door. You can see how it's starting to shape up, and now we'll go stick the lens through the bars into this spooky, spooky haunted tunnel. I don't know exactly when this was made. I'm going to guess that it was probably used until the 40s. Now, just so you know, there are some pictures of deer carcasses coming up here in about 20 seconds, just fair warning. These are just some scenes that we stopped to look at on our way home. That's Devil's Head from the west side of it. And at this spot, we found, well, I found a very horrendous stench when I was taking photos. And I looked around, and there were dozens of deer carcasses there. And I think that this is a spot where the Forest Service tosses all the deer carcasses. Just, it's off the road a little bit. Most people aren't going to be stopping here. It's not anything scenic. But I, of course, did, thinking that the photo of Devil's Head would be interesting. And the stench of those deer followed me the rest of the way home. So now some eye bleach, a pleasant cabin in the woods in a much different location, and a tree by that cabin. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next hike log.